Thank you for joining me this morning. Thank you for the introduction. I really appreciate that. Here I'm going to be talking about ITDR, and we are going into a little more detail of what this means. I myself hate acronyms, but this is one of those million ones that we need to know when we are in our profession. So as I was, I was introduced, I've been working on several identity-related products at different software companies, working with standards like LDAP, SCIM, other provisioning I could mention as well. I'm a testing lead at a small company, or that used to be a small company. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but I didn't have time to update my slides. Our company actually turned out to be critical to some other business, Imprivata, and we were required not so long ago. So I think that is also just a manifest of how important and critical ITDR can be to businesses, because it turned out that we were critical to the growth of Imprivata in many different ways. And even though we were looking to onboard them as customers, we ended up being acquired by them. So as in my role, I usually advocate and practice modern testing principles. If you want to read more about them, there are going to be a bunch of links in this presentation, but don't you worry, I'm going to post the slides up here. And the good folks at LastCon, they also will publish the recordings of these presentations. So hopefully that will help you if you don't want to spend too much time on taking notes. But in general, with modern testing, testing is an activity that is practiced by all team members, and testing leads, quality engineers, typically just to help others to level up their testing. It is also really focused on, bringing business value to a lot of those activities, and then how that manifests itself as an impactful practice. This is in contrast to traditional setups where you have separate QA teams and so on. Anyhow, I don't want to go too much into detail, but all as you know that I'm now in Imprivata. I just didn't have the time to get new t-shirts and new slides. But why did I want to have this presentation, and why did I propose this talk in general? First, because I felt like that we do not have enough discussions about an account-centric, identity-centric talk when it comes to preventing fraud. And there are obviously vendors in the marketplace that like identity providers and other solutions that are now building out these account-related capabilities, but they are detecting some of these malicious activities with some of these generic solutions is hard. For example, I heard at one of the other conferences earlier this year, a lady from a security team complained that, oh, I got yet another impossible travel alert from this and that vendor, and of course that person is on the plane and this is all fine and whatnot. Well, if some of the solutions that you have is very rudimentary and only looks at the location of an IP address to detect whether two subsequent events cannot be done, then it's very easy to get false alerts, and false alerts can lead to alert fatigue. You may miss the important signals. So being more nuanced about what you can and how can you detect some of these attacks is getting more and more critical. The attackers are not going to get any less sophisticated, especially now. How many talks do you see here about talking about AI and automated agents and so on? The other key thing here that often gets forgotten, and then you can see with some of the vendors, is that they take a week or so to start detecting certain types of attacks. Well, how much damage can a malicious actor do in a week? That is just a lot. So how well these solutions can detect a particular type of attack is also key. It should be a key consideration if you are thinking about a solution. And why do we care? Because again, we can lose revenue, customer satisfaction, brand reputation. Noisy neighbor, maybe you have two applications. One of them is getting bombarded and attacked and whatnot, and suddenly it impacts the other applications that you have in the same infrastructure. So those are also factors to think about. And I listen to this podcast. I really like it, love it, the Risky Business podcast. And more than 2 years ago, these guys were just amazing. And I have a link to that podcast at the end. They were pretty much mentioned, identity is the new perimeter. So just bear it in mind, how much of your, tax malicious activities are related or surrounded by or revolve around identities. And there's no surprise, if you have cloud computing, even the pandemic accelerated this working from home environment. You have your own devices, this BYOD, right? So those are all, but you have your users all using those services. Yes. So, and some people like these numbers. So this is again just what is at stake here, and these numbers are just highlight some of those problems that ITDR solutions can and should help you address. And first when I was introduced to talked about identity. So what the heck is an identity? So why don't we maybe define that? This is a nice image from Wikipedia, but I'll talk about it a later slide. Maybe it should be updated to more recent trends. And then you can see here you can have human or non-human entities who have certain identities, and all these identities have some sort of identifiers, attributes. It can be name, email, what kind of devices they are using, and so on. But again, you are centering your solution around a particular user and identity, and not just a log message. And I'll show you the example later on how it really manifests itself when you are working with a solution that is tailored to handle ITDR. And then, you could call it user types, user classes, but when you are, again, at the account level or identity level, you're thinking about these activities, then you also need to think about the business context that you are in and what kind of user classes, user types you're dealing with. And some of these are actually examples from our own customer base. We have a school district vendor. They have a separate kind of set of rules for students, parents, and staff, because they may behave differently and they may have different access. Like staff usually maybe 9 to 5 access, and if it's a school district, probably most of the activities are coming from the area of that school district and not outside. So, those are things that you want to, again, think about as you are building up those detection rules. At the marketplace vendor is one of our big customers. They have buyers, sellers, who are connecting via the marketplace, operators, and they have their own particular context. In this particular vendor, actually, it's on our website. It's a case study. They connect truckers and shippers and so on. And, the truck driver can be on the road across the country. So, their access pattern is probably different from somebody who is trying to find a trucker or a shipper. So
Those kind of things come into mind. They may use different, as I mentioned, all these user classes may have different behaviors that an ITDR solution can be custom tailored to. User behaves. These are actually, I didn't have to make these graphs. These are actually screenshots from the application we built or built. Think about some of these different kind of behaviors. What kind of where my activities are over the last 30 days or something. What are the typical ways? The circadian rhythm chart shows you what is typical user activity when I'm logging in, like maybe between 12 o'clock and 1 p.m. Is most activity, that's the normal, but sometimes we see some outlier activities between 5 and 6 p.m. So that is maybe something to be looked at if it is outside the norm of your context. How many events you have, whether you use VPNs or what kind of virtual private network providers do you use. Because we have some customers that, oh yeah, we have some of our employees, when they are remote, they are using a VPN, and this is the VPN provider we use. If you see something else that's suspicious, so it's not enough just to be on a VPN, but I need to make sure that you are using this particular provider. We can detect, or what kind of connections do you have between account, email, and so on. Something like a graph, like you see under the user behaviors title, can show you that. User agents, what kind of versions you have. Is it maybe suspicious if you start using a particular user agent version, and suddenly you see the user agent version being an older one than it was before, right? That is unlikely in the era of version numbers going up and self-updating browsers. These nuances can easily come into play. And as I mentioned, and this is why I said that maybe that Wikipedia image should be updated, is that nowadays we are talking about not just managed versus unmanaged entity types, but we are talking about human versus non-human AI agents that can be a particular threat vector as well. And we talked about a little bit through the examples what the business context is. But the context always matters. What is normal at one business may not be normal at another one. Whether you are facing your customers are actually end users, or whether those are internal users, that can again change the context, because you may have a lot of traffic coming from your company gateway machine, and you may need to drop into figuring out how you are mapping your private network IP addresses that can be fed into and provided to an ITDR that can, again, make distinction, even though typically you cannot really tell a whole lot about a private IP address. You may have multiple different applications, and they may behave differently. They may have different access patterns and so on. So you typically in enterprise you have multiple. And believe it or not, we do have customers who have multiple identity providers as well. So having some sort of a layer that can unify those and detect threats that can cross identity providers can be also an important factor. So this is like, what is ITDR, by the way? So if I haven't mentioned that, it is identity threat detection and response. The chart you see up on the top right corner is actually coming from the NIST cybersecurity framework, but shows you these different phases, and mostly the definitions on the respond and detect columns. But that is what really is, and with the focus on identity, I couldn't stress this more, that it is not. It is the first-class citizen in ITDR. And just to make this point a little more,
a little bit illustrate this. Chart comes from Gartner, shows you where what the responsibilities of the ITDR solution is, and then what those different pieces are in the picture when it comes to dealing with the identity threats. And a little bit more, I wanted to kind of, because many of us are, probably familiar with EDR solutions. I got a new laptop now we have a very strict corporate security at Imprivata. We had one also at Veracity. It's maybe one level up, so we have all these monitoring on our laptops now that I need to deal with. But those are more like endpoint level activities. With ITDR, we are again moving on to the user behaviors, identities in general. And again, this a little bit goes back this illustration about how it is different and why it is important to detect some of these activities very early on. How to reduce that time to find those problems. Again, the speed is key. In general. And it may sound kind of catchy, this title, but really this slide is meant to a little bit highlight some of the types of threats that you see in an ITDR system, and what kind of problems it can surface up to you, what kind of facets or do you have when you are dealing with in an ITDR system. So, by the way, feel free to ask any question in the middle. I'm okay to interrupt, but I'm happy to do that at the end as well. In general, the way I'm really thinking about solutions, this detection, prevention, response cycle, and when you work at large organizations, that then sometimes you have a separate detection team. There is another team that responds to those things, and it was very illuminating, for example, to hear Google had a webinar earlier this year where they talked about how they protect their cloud infrastructure, and they have separate teams to do these things, obviously because of their scale. But in each and every part of this cycle, which again should be a cycle, because one set of rules may or may not work tomorrow, because the threat actors evolve, they change. So we need to act and respond to that. We may identify new threats in the detection. So because of those changes, so we need to respond accordingly. And the other key question in the prevention is that do you catch everything, and hopefully you are not catching any kind of legitimate traffic or preventing it, because that can also be a problem. So here's a prevention example, and I included some kind of screenshots here from one of our authentication vendors, and some of the rules that we have in our place. This is actually taken from our production environment. We are dog fooding our own product, of course. So once somebody tries to sign up into our application, our authentication vendor has this rule that is calls out to our solution, and we have some of these rules that hey, if it's coming from a banned network or a banned email domain, if the IP address is a known Tor exit node, it shows up on some deny lists, then maybe deny or challenge the user. In this case, maybe deny it, and then the sign up never happens if that flow would mention that. So these are very nuanced rules that you can put in play to prevent somebody from actually even signing up for your service.
And but as I mentioned before, you want to block unwanted traffic, you want to allow legitimate traffic, and there's this Goldilocks principle, and we do have customers who sometimes have to respond to it, and there may be cases when it is they block something more, and then they can go back and adjust some of these or create exceptions to certain things, and it doesn't have to be deny or allow. It can be, hey, let me prompt this user for an MFA because I'm seeing something suspicious going on. And again, these screenshots is something like we have taken from our user interface. And I will talk a little bit about the anomalies too a little bit later. But let's move and talk a little bit about detection. So typically, users, legitimate and malicious users interact with your application. And hopefully you have some sort of service that logs all those activities, or the application itself logs certain events that is happening. And there are some of those that are related to user lifecycle. I logged in, I refreshed my token, especially when you are on a web-based application. I may have changed my credentials, I may have changed my email, or other identifiers that are related to me. And we in ITDR system collects all these events, and they build up some sort of knowledge about a particular user, a particular business, a particular user type. And based on those, it can alert you as a user, or even can take an automated action to maybe suspend the session, suspend the user, and then flag it for review. Anyhow, it can happen depending on how fast you are pushing these events through the system fairly quickly. In a matter of minutes, we can detect certain malicious activities. And then, you can take the appropriate action. I really wanted to show this because, I know it's an overused screenshots from maybe from the reference to the Matrix movies, that, when you really look at just the stream of events that you see in an application log, it's all may seem benign and everything is going fine, but once you start, putting those events together, and then you may find something that is less rosy as without those connections. And a little bit going deeper into these detection phases, as I mentioned, users do all kinds of actions as they interact with the application. Here I just listed some of those that maybe use like lifecycle events, not what you do with the application. Application logs these events, and the ITDR system is processing, but there's a lot that goes under the covers. In the application log, you may see that user did at this IP address that much and at this time, and that's it. But ITDR has the history of all those and can add some of this enrichment in terms of signals to those events, like what IP address, what location does it belong to, what country? Is it a VPN, non-VPN exit node? Or I mentioned that who is the VPN provider? It was the email recorded in the event, is it involved in the breach? Is it a free email domain, or it's a business account? Because we can detect that you may or may not want people to sign up for your service from free business domain. Is the user agent obsolete or not? We can, user agents publish their versions. Certain bots have particular user agent signatures that we can detect. Is the phone number a do not originate number, so you can never call that relay because it's like a 1-800 number or something similar. These things, the ITDR can enrich them and help it to build a profile trend and detect some of those threats, articulate certain risks with certain activities. There's a whole lot that is going on behind the scenes. And the last, really the last part is how you respond to that. A few weeks ago, we were at an industry event, and we showed the security analyst this account-centric view that you can see on the side, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is what I need to show to my director. Because we don't have this. I mean, all I see is that these logs coming in, but this is account-centric. I can see that, hey, what kind of sessions this user have, what kind of events happened in the past, how many of those events happens, what kind of risk signals we have. Like in this one, you see an impossible travel, or the email is breached, some VPN usage, and so on. I can see that, and hey, I added this user to this list at this time in case I want to have a list for accounts that I want to review later on. And not to mention, if I believe this is suspicious, now from the same interface, I can suspend this account, revoke all the sessions, and I can suspend it until I review with the user what's happening here, because it is not normal. So some systems make it automated, some make it manual, but in any case, you have an account-centric view, and that is huge. I'm kind of glossed over what threats versus risks are, and then at least in our kind of world that we are in, the way we try to differentiate the two is that risks are events that can possibly indicate malicious behavior, but in itself they are not. But you can use them to build up whatever business rules you want in your system, because in your context that may be a problem. For example, is the email coming from a disposable email provider like Temp.mail.org or Yopmail, or some of those? Is the user agent a bot? And sometimes when you look at it, it may look like a bot, and I have a slide on this at the end, but it is not a bot actually. Or is it a residential IP, or is it not a VPN? On this screenshot, you see that the IP address has this hosted label on it. It means that it's coming from one of the cloud providers. When you want end user traffic, then it usually doesn't come from a hosted provider. But you believe it or not, malicious actors often use cloud systems to spin up systems that can easily attack some of these services. So they do not necessarily represent something that is a threat. In our parlance, when we talk about this, and I'm going to go through some of these threats that we see. These are something that we have identified, and those are real. Those are something that you definitely want to take an action on, and some of these are I'm going to go over that. Some may wonder, what is an MFA location mismatch? Well, your system may send that, hey, somebody started a multi-factor authentication at one location, but finished it, across the ocean. That is a big problem, because then it means that something fishy is happening there, and so on. But maybe let's talk a little detail about some of these threats. Impossible travels, everybody knows that. You have subsequent events coming from separate locations. That is impossible because just physically cannot move from one location to another. Of course, you need to have really good location data on the IP addresses to be able to determine that. And for some IP addresses, believe it or not, is easier than for others. Some regions have better accuracy than others. So those, you don't want to get very, very precise on some of these, but definitely it's a factor to take into account. And of course, whether somebody's using a VPN or not, that's suddenly I show up a few thousand miles from here. That may be okay because I jumped on a VPN, so suddenly my traffic is coming from. So I don't want to get alerted for that, especially if that VPN provider is on my approved list of vendors, right? And sometimes on the same physical device, if you have an iCloud subscription, Safari will use the Apple relay addresses, IP addresses near your area. But if you switch to Chrome suddenly, then it is not. So it suddenly looks like you are having activities from two different IP addresses simultaneously. That can trip up certain systems. And believe it or not, some vendors actually give you location, not just 2 dimensions, but about your altitude as well. So that's why there is a 3rd dimension. That can also factor into these speed calculations, how quickly you went from one location to another. And impossible travel is important because it can be an indicator for leaked or breached credentials. Credential stuffing is another common form of a kind of a threat that can lead to, especially when it leads to account takeovers and so on. And I don't want to read the slides. Much of the picture is always worth 1,000 words. So I'm gonna show you this. This is actually from one of our clients had this attack going on. As you can see, there were like a ton of attempts, like millions, and of course, it's over two days. But there were some accounts that we detected that were successfully taken over. It took them a long time to do it, but and a large volume of events that could overwhelm a service, not us. So again, one of the other considerations when you think about a vendor or any kind of solution, can it scale to the needs of your business? Can it respond on time, and can it alert you? This is one of our alert cards that you would see. Session sharing is also something that we were surprised to see, but it does happen. You log into an application, you usually get a session token that is valid for a certain period of time, but to circumvent certain login restrictions, like how many times you can log into, how many places you can log into a service, you can share this token and suddenly access the same application from a different location. And that's also another possible threat to your business. You probably there are also a ton of other detection techniques that I haven't covered, but they are also can come into play or augment a lot of the detections. So for example, the way we are doing things is obviously nothing to do. There is nothing on the user side, on the client side. Like with endpoint detection, you have usually an agent running on your system. With the solution that we have, it's all just based on the logs that your application logs. There's nothing impacting in that sense, the end user. It all goes behind the scenes. But sometimes that's not enough. And sometimes you want to get more nuanced. And, this is where device fingerprinting comes into play. And device fingerprinting, some of the libraries I've seen for browsers, they can look at like at least 100 different attributes that you have in the browser and create a fingerprint based on that. So it is very refined, very detailed. So it's very unlikely that you're going to get the same fingerprint when you're using different browsers. But again, and it is not just limited to browsers. You can fingerprint other devices as well. Another detection technique that came up, actually I gave this talk a little bit different version because I'm always trying to refine it at the local meetup. And somebody mentioned that honeypots are also a good way to detect malicious activity. There are open source honeypots that are available. Anybody free to use. I have one at the end of this presentation. It's actually developed by Deutsche Telekom. You know the name here as T-Mobile. Actually, we do use honeypots ourselves. So it's a good way to detect malicious activity. The other interesting technique I've seen, and there are actually vendors who do this, not necessarily for accounts, but for like secret keys that you have, AWS keys and so on. They put canary keys into their systems, and they never use that. But when they detect somebody or some service accessing that key or accessing a canary account, they know that they have been breached. So that's what canary is for. And then that can be also a very powerful way to augment your security posture. So yeah, I think that's pretty much, hopefully now it's a little bit the fun part of the presentation. At least when I'm working at Versin now in Impravata, we look at a lot of data and a lot of data coming in from prospects, customers. We have processed millions of events every day. And it's very interesting to look at the data. To me, the shape of the data, how it is coming in is really interesting because we can learn a lot of things from it. Like, I didn't realize that how much automated bot traffic you have on the internet, but more than some estimates say more than half of the traffic on the internet is by bots or automated applications. When you look at the nuances of IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, those are so different. And I was surprised how much of share of the traffic is coming from IPv6 addresses. It's this in some sense shouldn't come as a surprise. We now have several home internet vendors that use the 5G technology, and they mostly use IPv6. Or, unlike with IPv4, NAT doesn't really come into play. So you get the IP address of the end device, right? So you may see more of those. The other is that, believe it or not, Windows XP is still used. I was like shocked, but this is still the case. I was like, oh my goodness. And of course, one of the other types of possible abuses is that when you see or potentially an indicator for some sort of phishing attempt is when you see a lot of these lookalike domains that may look like a legit one, but maybe I'm sure that you have seen these many security trainings that you have to go through, that when you're inspecting a URL, email address, whether that's the real one or maybe just one or two characters different from the legitimate one. And for example, just for fun, I didn't know some of these things when we started looking at data and what it is, and it looked like something you wouldn't normally notice. But when we look at millions of events, millions of logs, then these surface up. And I hope you may know some of the answers to these questions, but to me, for example, I didn't know that IPv6 networks typically, when you provision it, those are /64. So, the internet IPv4 addresses are 32-bit wide, so it's like the entire IPv4 address space to the 30 seconds. That's the size of a IPv6 network that typically those providers assign to your machine. And we have seen several emails coming in via logs that
use homoglyphs. These are characters that are look the same as the ASCII ones, but they are from a different character set. So in this particular case, C is from the Cyrillic alphabet, and that has a different Unicode representation. In a user interface, you may not be able to detect the difference between them. It may fool somebody, but when you look at the binary representation, it's going to definitely show up. And we have seen a lot of these, and there are other characters that are look just the same as their ASCII representation, or very hard to, especially me getting older, getting hard to decipher. And what I didn't know when I was looking at, hey, look at this user agent string, and it looks like a bot. What is this Twitter bot, Face bot, what not? And it turns out that it's your Messages app on iOS that has this user agent string. Whenever you are looking at messages and it has a web link in it, the way it is fetching that preview, it is using this user agent string. So it's not a bot. It's an iOS device that is making this call. The reason why, the rationale they put all these user agent strings, the Face bot, Twitter bot, whatnot, inside the user agent, because there in the Apple's justification, it was less likely to be blocked by some websites if they had these indicators in it. So you decide, but it's definitely can trick you thinking something else. As I mentioned, a few resources here. Definitely NIST Cybersecurity Framework. RiskyBiz is an amazing newsletter. They have a podcast as well. It's a show based out of Australia and New Zealand, but it's probably the highest quality. I'm always amazed how much I learn from it. I really like Clint Gibler's ITDR security newsletter. It's again very good weekly. I always look forward to reading it. This is the Deutsche Telekom honeypot service, the third one. And if you want to, have some fun with homoglyphs, there is this website that allows you to detect it or even generate some. And I think that's all I have for you all. I hope you get away with some sense of what ITDR can do for you, and maybe in your context, how it is different from other possible solutions, and maybe get you a glimpse of why you would want to add it. When we had that meetup a few weeks ago at OWASP Boston, there was another speaker there who is a security analyst, and he mentioned that what he was surprised about, and I was surprised about that too, is that usually ITDR solutions are, in terms of cost, are very small compared to the larger security software that you already typically have in place with EDR as well. So it is almost like a no-brainer to add it, or no-brainer to turn it on, especially if your vendor already provides some capabilities, but it can bring great value. And it wasn't coming from me, it was coming from somebody who is working as an insurance company to investigate certain incidents. So just bear in mind, again, we are in Provider now. You can reach me here. I don't know if you have, we have a few minutes for questions, maybe, if you have any. Otherwise, thank you for your attention. I thank you for listening to me and bearing with me.
So, thanks for this presentation. It was quite just like a well-rounded perspective. So, what would you say is one misconception about ITDR that you wish that security leaders like they understood more about ITDR?
Yes. So one thing, and this is I really want to mention because this was the reason, one huge reason why we were acquired by this company, is that they wanted to, Imprivata is in the healthcare IT space. They have a lot of installations in hospitals and so on. And as you can imagine, those practitioners there, they need to authenticate, log in, and they have a lot of shared devices. They are not carrying these consoles with them. But to prevent any kind of malicious activity, they don't want to bother them to a lot of the step-up authentication and other types of methods because it takes the time away from them. But if they have like a sophisticated ITDR solution that can be much more nuanced, much more sophisticated, then they can reduce this friction for the end users. And end user experience is also something or a frictionless experience for customers can differentiate you from the other competitors in your space. So obviously it's a great security solution. It provides you much more nuanced, much more sophisticated way to look at your activities, but also it can reduce friction for your end users. And this is something that I don't think some leaders understand.
So what would, I mean, just based on that, what would be like the hardest thing about turning ITDR insight into fast, automated responses? Is it the data or is it people or process, like in terms of?
I mean, you definitely need to understand how your users are expected to behave, what is normal, what is not normal. You have to have all your ducks in order first. And then as you look at and you see things surface up by the ITDR, you can refine those. So you can get into this loop. So you can reduce as much friction as possible. You can have your ITDR make automated responses in those cases. So you don't have to, because nobody wants to learn another tool. Nobody has time for that. I want the tool to do it for me, and I'm happy to look at exceptions, but as little as I want, because I have limited staff in the SOC. I can't do this all day. I want that system to solve these more challenging problems for me because my eyes are falling out looking at all these events.